very near the last words in the New Testament, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had disappeared, and I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And then I heard a loud voice call from the throne, "Look, God lives among human beings. He will make his home among them. They will be his people, and he will be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, and no more mourning or sadness or pain. The world of the past will be gone. Behold, I make all things new." A new heaven, I don't know a whole lot about. I suppose I always thought that the old heaven would be quite good enough for me after a decent length of time in this old world of mourning and sadness and pain and tears. Although I guess not everyone thinks so. Garrison Keillor on the attitude of the people of Lake Wobegon toward heaven: "My people aren't paradise people. We've lived in Minnesota all our lives, and it took a lot out of us. My people aren't sure if we'll even like paradise, not sure that perfection's all it's cracked up to be. My people will arrive in heaven and stand just inside the gate, shuffling around. It's a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. We'll say, 'No, thank you, we can't stay for eternity. We'll just sit and have a few minutes of bliss with you, and then we'll have to get back.' We were brought up to work, not complain, accept that life is hard and make the best of what little we have. So when we come to the grandeur and grace of an eternal flower garden ringed by mountains beside a pearl blue coral sea under the continuous sun, we will naturally say, 'Oh, no thanks, it's too much really. I don't care for it. Just a little ice, please.' But a new earth, that's another matter. Anyone in their right mind can come up with a lot of suggestions for improvement on the current one. No, we grow weary and are saddened by the good people we know who bravely battle their cancer. We watch television sickened by the evil that human beings are capable of. We mourn the children we read about in the morning newspaper who are beaten or abused or neglected. We grieve over the misery that afflicts some of our elderly friends in their fading days. I dare say you can make your own punch list of changes that you would like to make. Advent is a time in which we are invited to think about what is coming and how and whether we can really hope for the future. Actually, the season didn't even come into being until the close of the 6th century, when Rome established that there would be 4 Sundays of Advent before Christmas. And for most of Christendom, at the beginning at least, it was to be a period of dieting and discipline in preparation for the great feast. Doesn't sound like a half-bad idea even today. But at the heart of the invitation is the invitation to hope. And not only for our own story and those closest to us, but for the whole shebang, the whole world. An age however far off, when there will be no more tears, no more death, no more mourning, no more sadness, no more pain. This old world will be gone, and we will be with God in some new realm of his creation. It's a grand hope which moderns have difficulty even getting their minds around, but which at the same time we can't quite give up on either. A friend of George Harrison, speaking of his death the other day, said, "Well, I'm sure he has gone to the nice place." That's about as much as some people can manage. John Polkinghorne, physicist at Cambridge University, can go a bit further. He writes, "Despite the strangeness, bitterness, and incompleteness of this present life, human beings do not give way to despair for the most part. In the human heart there is something that responds to the conviction expressed so powerfully by Julian of Norwich, that in the end all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. I think," says this scientist, "that this intuition of hope is an essential and significant aspect of what it means to be human. It's not just a survival technique for whistling in the dark to keep our spirits up, but it is an encounter with the reality within which we live. But then he goes on to say, I do not think there is hope for humanity alone, but rather the Creator must surely care in appropriate ways for the whole of creation, and there must be cosmic hope as well as human hope. So that's it. New you, new me, new earth, someday, by the hand of God. And this is important because it says two things about how we are to orient ourselves toward life in the course of our days here. How we ought to deal with now and tomorrow. The first word is that we cannot do it. We cannot create that world where there are no more tears, crying, grief, sadness, on our own, with our own ingenuity and strength. The perfect world, the perfect country, the perfect family, the perfect me rests finally with God and the kingdom that He may one day, pray God, bring. We can't pull it off even at Christmas time. I've not yet arrived, writes the Apostle Paul to friends in Philippi, but I press on. And that's the permanent human condition until the end, until that great getting up day, as the spiritual has it. More maliciousness, you see, has been done in the human story, whether on the grand scale of nations or in the parlors of ordinary people, by obsession with perfection. The assumption that somehow we've got to get it right and can. In the 19th century, many assumed, near its end, that the kingdom of God was well within the reach of human determination and expertise. 100 years ago, in 1893, at the Columbian Exposition here in Chicago, the American Press Association asked 74 social commentators to look a century into the future. The kind of talking heads you see on the cable news at night now. Here are their predictions. Prisons and poorhouses will have ceased to exist. Divorce will not even be considered necessary. By the end of the 20th century, taxation will be reduced to a minimum. The entire world will be open to trade, and there will be no need of standing armies. I guess my favorite is this one. In 1993, the government will have grown more simple, as true greatness always tends towards simplicity. The rise of Soviet communism began idealistically enough. Observers, especially from Britain, visited Moscow and returned to say, I have seen the future and it works. What began, you see, as a perfectionist, massive effort to create the ideal world, the utopia of prosperity and equality, imploded under the criminal abuse of the power that went with the effort. Writings like Orwell's Animal Farm and Golding's Lord of the Flies are eloquent testimony to the failure of utopian visions, wherever you find them. But we in America have our own idolatries as to who can do it, whether it be Washington or Wall Street, who can bring in the kingdom. Daniel Borston, once director of the Library of Congress, reminds us that we are extravagant and excessive in our expectations of this world. We expect the contradictory and impossible. We expect to be rich and charitable, powerful and merciful, active and reflective, kind and competitive. We expect to be inspired by mediocre appeals for excellence, to be made literate by illiterate appeals for literacy. We expect to eat and stay thin, to be constantly on the move and ever more neighborly, to revere God and to be God. The result is, when it all falls apart on us, a kind of low-grade despair, as we begin to realize over the years that life will always be a mixed bag, will never conform to our wish dreams. But says an older way, this world is and remains until the end unfinished, as do each one of us. Flaws and failures, illness and accidents are part of life in this world. Things happen. In the words of the Apostle Paul to his friends in Rome, the whole creation groans as in labor pains. And not only that, we too groan inside ourselves, waiting. But on the other hand, if we cannot create the kingdom, the ideal world, utopia, the idyllic home, the absolutely beautiful marriage, the perfect family, this is not the whole story. We do have what the Apostle Paul calls the first fruits of the Spirit. Let me decode that for you. The fact that God has not yet ended this old story in a new earth with no more tears, sadness, or pain does not mean that he's off on vacation. By his Spirit, he is active in human affairs, yours and mine, often subtly, invisibly, working the beginnings of that far-off kingdom, working here and there, health in the face of disease, more mature love with the growth of the years, creativity in the face of discouragement, ingenuity that makes life a bit lighter for many, courage in the face of evil that enables some measure of justice and peace in this world. Because the end has not arrived does not mean that some remarkable things are not happening to move our lives a bit toward that new earth we dream about. The problem, of course, is history never runs along neatly, never runs out the way we anticipate and manipulate and the way we want it. We run into stubborn and arbitrary problems that do not easily yield. We run into evil human beings who must be dealt with. Some of you younger, do you remember the age of Aquarius back in the 60s? Did you notice it did not dawn? And many turned disillusioned and despairing and ran off to some ashram in India or drowned themselves in some addiction. As Ahmed Nash said back then, he said, progress was once a very good idea. However, it's been going on far too long. You see, the naive assumption that things are going to get better and better easily and soon without any detours or reversals is far different from a basic faith that God is somehow still in control and His Spirit is at work in this world and our lives, and therefore the future remains open and filled with unseen, unpredictable possibilities. Anybody predicting the future 15 years ago was wrong. George Garrett, professor of English at the University of Virginia, writes, "What argues against the rigidity of simple and secular attitude has been the solid proof, the irrefutable evidence that the unexpected can occur in spite of all strategies and all systems." Item. Some years ago, there was a steady parade of left-wing scholars who came to and through the place where I work, proclaiming the decline and demise of these United States and holding up as an example of the ideal modern state and society, combining both equality and liberty, holding up the East German state. And how often I pontificated both here and in East Germany that the Berlin Wall would never come down in my lifetime. Which means what? Which means that no matter how grim the facts of your life at the moment, or for that matter, how easy the facts of your life, you still have the right to trust that God has a future for you which you may not even have the foggiest idea about. Let me ask you, is it so clear that the late last disaster in your life has really determined today entirely? Can you say as you step back and survey the years that the sufferings and troubles of any given moment were an adequate clue as to what the next month or year might bring? You see, to hope in God is to hope in what we cannot see, says the apostle. It means to trust that there's more to our story than we can imagine in the moment. It is to believe that your future is in the hands of God and there will be some good out there, maybe not what you would like, but some good. It means that the future is in fact open. Anything is possible. One person was asked how she conceived of her God. And a veteran of many ups and downs, she said, God to me is surprise. And it does make all the difference in the world whether you interpret life through the eyes of this perspective, the difference between despair and optimism, between depression and hopefulness. And as the apostle says, it is in hope that we are already saved. What does he mean? Hope holds us up, heals us. Indeed, all kinds of studies indicate that it is hope that keeps us going, keeps the immune system tuned up, fighting the bugs, generating the resources within us to head toward the future. Certainly, if we don't have something out there ahead of us that excites, we're in trouble. Scientists tell us, believe it or not, that rats without hope drown in water in a little more than 3 minutes. If you can figure out a way to give them a glimmer of hope, they'll swim for 36 hours nonstop. And we probably would as well. Dr. Thomas Hackett, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, has conducted several studies of patients in Mass General in the coronary care unit. In his words, patients who deny being all that frightened, who minimize the seriousness of their illness, who are persistently hopeful, tend to survive in far larger numbers than those who are constantly in despair. Israeli study demonstrates that hope, if it's serious, if it's long-term, leads to physiological changes that improves the body's resistance. We are indeed, as the apostle said, saved by hope. The word saved means healed, made whole. And that's good news, that's hopeful news, because it means that hope is not something we're born with, it's not a part of our personality makeup, nor is hope shaped by our circumstances, but hope is a choice of faith and perspective which generates persevering confidence in the face of what we cannot see and predict. That's precisely why I think hope is most often found in places where one does not expect it, that don't appear hopeful at all, whereas despair often prevails in the midst of a malaise of affluence that has ceased to look to tomorrow. Precisely because their hope is grounded in the God who will one day create all things new, they're able to persevere in hoping each day for some small but powerful sign of His presence. Precisely because they can trust that one day He will wipe all tears away, one day there will be no more death, they're able to hang in there hopefully through the struggles and delights that shape our days now. It's only as we're sure of the ultimate that we can give ourselves to the mundane, to the normal. A real confidence in promise of life. Irving Kristol, often on the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal, some of you have read him, commented a few years ago, the decline of belief in personal immortality has been the most important political fact of the last 100 years. Why? Because it has eroded hope and confidence in life. Gordon Allport, the great psychologist, insisted, ultimately it is only the religious hope that upholds a person against disaster. While it's true that any type of personal hope will give us something to live for, it is only religious hope that holds everything in place and gives equal meaning to suffering and to joy, to death and to life. An illustration of the willingness on the basis of a grand hope to go at the day, in my mind, is a gal by the name of Etty Hillesum, a quite remarkable woman of faith who died in Auschwitz on November 30th, 1943, almost exactly 58 years ago this weekend. She kept a diary both before and during her internment in that camp, which was published posthumously under the title An Interrupted Life. On July 3rd of that day, she wrote this: "All I want to say is this, the misery here is quite terrible, and yet late at night when the day has slunk away into the depths behind me, I often walk with a spring in my step along the barbed wire, and then time and again it soars straight from my heart. I can't help it, that's just the way it is, like some elementary force, the feeling that life nevertheless is glorious and magnificent, and one day we shall have a whole new world. So against every new outrage and every fresh horror, I will put up one more piece of love and goodness, drawing strength from within myself. I may suffer, but I will not succumb. And if I should survive unhurt in body and soul, but above all in soul, without bitterness and without hatred, then I shall have a right to a say after the war. Maybe I'm an ambitious woman. I would like to have just a tiny little bit of a say. Well, Eddie has had her say in her witness to the power of hope, to endure anything. A new heaven and a new earth, they will be his people, he will be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning, nor sadness, or pain, for the world of the past shall be gone. Behold, I am making everything new. That's a hope to live by and live for. Amen.